Alright, hello everybody, it is Claire, and I'm back with another one of these player breakdown list video things. I did this for Season 0, I did it for the upper div, but for anyone that didn't watch either of those videos, let me quickly explain what we're looking at. So first of all, this is the player list for the lower division. It's all 40 players, so captains included. Um, I've gone through individually and made sure that everyone has at least won 5 for role preference. Some players, for whatever reason, choose to just put a bunch of 1s, 2s, 3s, whatever. But the way this sheet works is that it divides up the player base based on what roles they say they're comfortable playing. So anyone that has a 5 or a 4 for any role will be put in the corresponding column. So we have pause 1, pause 2, pause 3, pause 4, and pause 5. And that's pretty much it. There are duplicates. If people said they were comfortable in multiple positions, they're in multiple columns. That's how that works. For the core section here, 1 through 3, there's a little legend. Any pause 1 or pause 3 that said they could also play mid has been put in bold. And any pause 1 or pause 3 that said they can play both is italicized. And then captains are in purple, so you know that you can't pick them. And yeah, that's pretty much it. This sheet will be linked along with the video post if you just want to look at the sheet itself. That's all there is to it. But for now, I'm going to give my personal opinions on the draft and the player pool and what I think should, could, will happen, I guess. So this draft, first of all, is a lot more like last season. With the upper division, you had the fall through factor. So there wasn't any real risk of running out of players in a certain position. That was something I highlighted pretty heavily last season, since it was something that definitely could have happened. I think arguably did happen. I don't remember if any captains really felt that way, but there was definitely teams that lacked players that were comfortable in certain roles, but some of those were intentional, so it's hard to say. Um, but yeah, it's a lot more like that, where there's only 40 players. With upper division, there was 80. If the lowest or the highest MR player remaining didn't play the role you wanted, you could just pick someone lower that played the role. Um, and on top of that, I think the upper division had, I think, in theory, a smaller MMR gap or a stretch. I think in theory, the difference between the highest player and the lowest player that could be picked was like less than 2,000. I want to say it was like 2,800, 2,600 to like 4,500, 4,400. In reality, players much lower than 2,600 got picked, so that didn't really happen. But in theory, that's how it could have worked. But anyway, so here we're a little different. We have the highest players are in the low 3Ks, and the lowest players are all the way down to 180 MMR. Um, so yeah, before I actually, I guess, say anything meaningful, if I say anything meaningful at all, I should point out how much money is in the pool. It's a lot more than the upper division. We actually have a whopping 8,000 fluffers available here, 250 per player on average, assuming all 8,000 get spent. There's usually some left over at the end, so that probably won't happen, but in theory, it's 8,000 total, so 250 per player. The upper division only had like 6,800, just under, so we could potentially see some players go for a lot more than they did in upper. The most expensive player in upper was, I believe, Phantom at 599 fluffers. Didn't even break 600. It's possible we see players break 600 here, but I'm not actually sure if that will happen despite the increase in money. Something we saw a lot last season was that most captains, held on to some of their money till the end to try and make sure they weren't left with too many of the like 1K players. Cat's team was obviously a huge exception in that I believe they had like 3 players under 2K and then Phantom, who she spent a huge amount of money on, and that team actually did all right. But then other players, I don't think they spent more than like 300, or other captains, I should say, didn't spend over like 300 on a single player, and they ended up with their lowest player being well above Guardian, being like Archon. So those exact numbers won't happen here because the overall pool is a lot lower. There's no 4K players, there's no Phantoms, there's no Harbingers, there's no who else was there? I guess V dropped out, but no Scroomlights, no Yumis. Um, the highest MMR players here are all in the low 3K, and they aren't really players that I know super well, to be honest. I think a lot of the players that are known, at least amongst the captains for upper division, that are like known for playing in higher leagues for the most part, got picked. There are definitely some exceptions. Fichet, Rabbi, um, they definitely play in like RD2L where they're used to being like the lowest MMR player, but yeah, I think a lot of players like I picked up Reedy, Snowstorm got picked up, a few 2K supports got picked up just for I guess friend picks. Um, but yeah, so a lot of these players are just players I don't really know all that well. So I don't have too much to say on like the specifics here. But assuming that the captains that are picking know a bit more, I think it is actually possible that we do see some high bids. And I say that without a lot of certainty. 'Cause it's hard to say. I don't know for sure if any captains are going to feel it's worth spending a lot of money on these players, if they feel any of these players are going to really carry them. I mean, I know like Pyro is maybe one person I've seen really carry some games. And it's possible that in LD2L games that I don't pay attention to, that some of these other guys, like I think Loose Moose played LD2L. Aware Ham, I'm pretty sure did. The Kunkka guy, Orange Jesus has as well. Nick is obviously on here, although he's a captain. Zach Roy had a very good showing last season. Like some of these players, I think could potentially be worth a lot of money. Um, they aren't testing these 4K players anymore, so this is really their area to shine. But it is going to be a question of how comfortable captains are with not having money towards the end of the draft. And that's what's going to be interesting to look at here. Personally, I think like when I look at this player list and I'm seeing, just within players that say they can play pause 4, what is this? This is like 10 players? Well, 10 players below 1500 MMR. I don't know if it'll actually be that big a deal to get like 2 of these players. Like in theory, some captains should get 2 of these players. There's 10 of them. That's more than 8. Math, arithmetic. Let's go. Um, and I think if you have a player that you really believe can carry games, and you think is a player worth playing around, I actually think it's probably fine to spend a large portion of your money. But you do, of course, have to be careful as long as you're able to get a player for each role. I guess that's kind of the one asterisk, the small print at the bottom of the page. Because I could see someone like Pyro, especially. I mean, I'll use Pyro as an example because he's one of the players I actually kind of know and have watched play in AD2L. I mean, that's someone that I could see carrying games for sure. And we'll throw Nick and Zach Roy on the pile as well since they won Fluffy Hat last season in a much higher MMR division. If you end up spending a lot of money on one of these players, and you are able to make sure your roles fit comfortably, I think it will be fine to have multiple players under 2K. Even if you have 3 players under 2K, it'll be more than average, but I think it'll be fine. But on that note, we should look at the roles because I've been talking about that small print at the bottom of the page. There are once again a slight lack of core players. If I look at this other page here again, we have 29 total players that have said that they, have put a 4 or a 5, that they said that they're comfortable in playing a core of some kind, pause 1, 2, or 3. The total amount of players needed for a div of 8 teams is, of course, 24 players. So there's just barely enough. And that's assuming that, some of these players, maybe they said they're willing to play core, but maybe they're actually support mains and are going to get picked up for support, which would lower the pool. There are some players on here like Poppy, who I'm going to be honest, I would be a little surprised to see actually ending up on a core role. I imagine most captains don't want to take that risk. Um, and there's maybe a couple others. I see like the 2600 MMR players. I don't know them personally, but I without knowing anything, I would assume most captains aren't looking to put them on core. So it is definitely super tight. There's not an excess of core players here. Captains will have to be careful to make sure that they get a player on each core role, because supports, I mean, 60% of the pool has said that they're willing to play pause 4. Over half the pool said they're willing to play pause 5. That really shouldn't be an issue. But I'm looking at the mid, and I'm saying that there's only, what is this, 13 players for the 8 slots that need to be filled for mid players. And, you know, it's going to be it's going to be tight. So I'm thinking that a lot of captains will make sure they have at least a little bit of money so that they can make sure they can get a mid player. But I think after that, they're probably free if they want to kind of go for a more top-heavy team to put a big bid on a pause 1 or a pause 3. Or if they want a more balanced team to try and just save their money and see what players they can get for, you know, only 200, 300 fluffers. We'll see. I guess I could take a quick look at the captain's list and the money tied to them before I close off here. I feel like I haven't said as much of interest as I did with upper. But sorry, I don't have as strong opinions on this one, I guess. The money's actually super even. It only goes from 880 to 100, or yeah, 1,150. I, I swear that's significantly smaller than upper. I think upper was a much larger gap between the poorest and the richest captain. These are all wrong. These are the upper captains. Interesting. But okay, so I think that probably puts a lot of pressure on like Sir Fireball and maybe especially PVC Pipe, because I don't think PVC Pipe is much of a core player. He certainly hasn't indicated that he is here. He's put himself as 4 or 5. Because these players don't have a whole lot of additional money to make sure that they get. I mean, in theory, it should be enough, right? Like, it's 1,000 MMR. You get like 200 fluffers almost to make up for that 1,000 MMR difference. So, but there's definitely, I think, a little bit of pressure on them, once again, especially PVC Pipe, to make sure that they can use that money to fill out their core roles. You know, so I don't imagine PVC Pipe will be spending any money on some of these higher MMR supports. Of course, we got Best in the West, who unfortunately fell through. I think he probably, being a pause 5 player, would have wanted to play an upper div, but do well. Happens. But yeah. Yeah, I guess that's all I have to say, huh? I could briefly mention, of course, the offlaners. It's kind of a similar situation to upper, where once the pause 1s and pause 2s start getting picked, assuming they have higher priority, which they might not, the offlane pool does get very small. There's only 5 players that have put offlane on their preferences that haven't also put 1 or 2 on their preferences. I don't know how many of these players are actually offlane mains, of course. You kind of can't know that without looking at Dota buffs or talking to the players, but I think there's a few. But it is possible that, similar to last season, we could get towards the end of the draft and some captains may start realizing that, oh shit, I need an offlaner. So I don't know, something to keep in mind. I think this is a much more difficult task for the lower MR captains than it was the higher MR captains. I think fall through draft is a lot kinder to those at the top. And, so good luck to you guys that are captaining. And I guess that's how I'll sign off. See you after the lower division draft, where I'll have some ranking content for both divisions. But until then, bye bye.